to Washington and I'm going to put it in my office. And most of it, however, I don't have the space for. I really wish I had the space for the housing development that you guys built for me. But I am so glad that the Bronx Museum for Children is going to have that art bus and is going to open up a museum so we can show everything you created. I'm so proud. Looking at the art, it is so clear to me that I've been given a very precious opportunity today. Because I know that all of you here right now, you will be the mayors, the congresspeople, the senators, the borough presidents, the judges, the justices, the lawyers, the doctors, the artists, the astronauts, the educators, the teachers, the nurses, the librarians, the social workers, the architects, engineers, authors, painters, and police officers of the next generation. And I'm lucky I got to meet you today. You've all heard I grew up here in the Bronx, right? I live in Washington now. But a lot of my family is still here. My aunts are all here. I have a lot of cousins who live here. So I do come back a lot. And like Jennifer Lopez, who is known as J-Lo and Jenny from the Bronx, you just heard, I'm the Justice of Law and Order from the Bronx. You know, the reality is, though, that who I really am, and I'm going to be forever, is Sonia from the Bronx. It's hard when you look at adults to think of them as kids. Have some of you seen pictures of your parents when they were babies or when they were young? How many of you look like your parents? But do you really, really believe they were just like you? You think so? I didn't. I would look at my mother when I was a kid and I would stare at her and I would say, she couldn't, she's so smart. She's so beautiful. How am I ever going to grow up to be like her? Well, the reality is that I'm not as beautiful as my mom is, but I'm Sonia now, and I now have a really big job, but I still am a little kid in my heart. I've been telling some of you of that. And it's been a really special year for me. I got to meet the President of the United States. I got to throw out a first pitch at Yankee Stadium. And I had the place I lived in as a child, the projects. Just last month, they were named after me. They're now the Justice Sonia Sotomayor Housing Development. When I was a kid like you, I spent every weekend at Abuelita's house. My abuelita, my grandmother, Mercedes, lived in Hunts Point. How many of you are from Hunts Point? Some of you, huh? And as children, my cousins and I were best friends. And every weekend we played at Abuelita's house. My brother Juan, my cousins and I loved visiting the Bronx Zoo and the Botanical Gardens. We loved going to Orchard Beach. How many of you have been to Orchard Beach? Yeah. Sonia Manzano's book, No Dogs Allowed, made me laugh. Because how many of your families are just like the family in the book? It took my family hours to put things together. And I would be standing there saying, hurry up, let's get there, let's get there. And they would just take forever. Are your families like that too? Yeah, I know. But we had really happy days in Orchard Beach. Now, a few years back, I was at a party with my family. And my cousin Miriam was sitting up there. And she's a bilingual education teacher in middle school right now. We were at this party, and her daughter was misbehaving a little bit. And Miriam looked at Corinne and said, Corinne, would you stop that already? You're just as bad as Sonia was when she was a little kid. Now, today, you hear all those adults telling you how good I was? Even my mother says that now. The real story was, I wasn't bad, but I just could not sit still. I was always asking questions. I was always running around. I could not stand up and for 1 second, just like you, right? They just always running after me. One day I hid under the bed so that they couldn't catch me. And I was always finding a way to get my cousins and I into trouble because I was the one making them laugh the loudest or scream the loudest. And so whenever anything went wrong at a family gathering, the aunts would walk in, my grandmother would walk into the room and say, "Sonia, what did you do now?" It got so that Miriam, they would walk into the room and Miriam would point and say, "Sonia did it." Now, even though I couldn't sit still, at a certain point, I finally learned how. You know how? When I started reading books. Because I learned so much when I lived in the Bronx. And it was a world for me that grew bigger. I traveled into space. I traveled all over the world when I read books. And I learned something that I hope that today will help some of you learn, which is that words can create pictures in a very special way. I want to give you just one little example of how words can create pictures. Have you ever seen a picture of a person who looks a little gross?